thrilled to have with us Beth Peretta, who is the CEO and lead of Peretta Autosport, frequently referred to as the most powerful woman in motorsports. No pressure, Beth, right? But which is a feat in and of itself. And really looking forward to this one-on-one conversation with Chris Lencheski. So please join me in giving Beth a warm welcome.
Is this one better? Okay. All right. Am I good back there? All right.
Can you hear me? No. Can they hear me?
All right. Beth, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to begin here. It's always, when you're a fan of any sport, or you grow up in it, and certainly I did, because I get a lot of the racing questions here. Every once in a while, you certainly know of someone, and you know the success that they're having, particularly because racing is so associated with automotive business that you really can't separate the two. I mean, it's a global business. It's one that's attracted, my ear, my eye, pretty much my whole life. But before we even get into the fact that you are the founder, owner, and team principal of Peretta Autosport, the first woman-owned, woman-driven, and woman-forward team in IndyCar Series history, I want to talk about your background at Fiat Chrysler, because that's where the success is laid. And let me tell you, you have to be absolutely smashingly good to run the performance division, because when they say race on Sunday, sell on Monday, you'll have the entire dealership network around the world say, we have to win. Mm-hmm. It's not about the check, right. We have to win. So rather than me running off the championships, you run off the championships.
Yeah, I have a NASCAR championship, a Cup championship ring, which is hilarious because I'm just from like the suburbs of Connecticut, so I don't think I expected that. But yeah, shout out to Connecticut. And with all due, I grew up as a fan. I was a racing fan. So the fact that I eventually found myself in a role where I was running global motorsport programs is still kind of ridiculous to me, let alone what I do now. So I grew up watching it on TV, but eventually wind up getting this job at Fiat Chrysler, where I'm running the brand, the SRT brand, Street and Racing Technology. The way that most car companies do it, if you're the performance division, you usually oversee motorsport because you have engineering crossover. Respectfully to everybody that works at car companies, but usually your best and brightest work in the performance divisions and in racing because it's so unwavering and unforgiving, and it also has so much attention. Everybody's watching. So car companies will even take their best engineers and put them through like a year-long or 2-year-long rotation through a motorsport program, and then they get spat back out, and then they wind up being in leadership roles in engineering because it's so critical with what you do in racing. It's interesting because although it's sports, there's still so many other sort of arms to it, and so there's a lot of things that you can glean from having a racing program. So while at Fiat Chrysler, I was lucky enough to oversee NASCAR, and we won the Cup Championship in 2012. It was the first time and it was with the Dodge brand. So because it was Fiat Chrysler, you have all these different brands, Dodge, Jeep, Chrysler, and then because it was Fiat Chrysler, it's Maserati, at the time Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, and we also, with SRT, had the Viper. So brought the Viper back, the Gen 5 Viper, which we actually launched at the New York Auto Show in 2012. And the day that we announced the return of the Viper, we also announced the return of the Viper to racing, because it's so much of the heritage and the pedigree of that car. So so we won this championship in NASCAR Cup in 2012, and Dodge had not won since 1975, so it was a bit of a dry spell. And that was with Team Penske, Roger Penske, who is a pillar, obviously, in business, but also in racing. And that, interestingly, for all his success on the IndyCar side, had never won in NASCAR. So that was his first Cup championship in NASCAR, so that was a big deal, foreshadowing for where my career goes later. And I actually knew him previous to that, because prior to working for Fiat Chrysler, I worked for a car company called Aston Martin. And that's actually how I initially met Roger Penske. He was one of our dealers. And then also with the Viper, as I mentioned, we then go racing, and that's in the sports car category. So if you've seen like Ford versus Ferrari racing at Le Mans, it's that type of racing. And we did race all across North America, did take it to Le Mans. What was great about that, as you say, it sets the foundation for where I am now, is that was what we call a factory program. So the car company was funding basically everything. Because you could justify sort of that crossover. And so it was building a car from the ground up and a team from the ground up. And in 2.5 years, we won the championship.
Yeah, I got to tell you.
Which is a short amount of time.
2.5 years to win the championship is...
With a brand new car.
Yeah, it's a rocket ship. It doesn't happen. We were fortunate during the ski and cubbing days with General Motors to win Le Mans a few times, and And it was a happy bunch, very inebriated bunch of people. But what I will say is that when she came on the scene and you win that championship, especially the captain's first NASCAR championship, it's also about loyalty.
Yes.
And it's also about hard work. And I said it in the other panel, you got to put in the hard yards. There's a ton of pressure on anyone running this, let alone you, for lots of other reasons too, because unfortunately, our media business at the time isn't as friendly as you might think.
No.
It's a bit old guard, especially,
Yeah.
I won't call out the magazines, there aren't really magazines anymore.
But they were when I was
But they were,
there.
yeah,
Which
exactly.
is not that long ago, but they were magazines. They didn't take kindly to a petite blonde girl from Connecticut coming in and running the race programs. What could she possibly know?
Yeah.
And yeah.
You knew how to build teams.
I did.
You knew how to build culture. You knew how to build responsibility. And you also called them out when they weren't winning. You said, hey, we got to get this together.
Yeah. And it's funny because, so the thing about it, though, is it's still a sport, right? So you still have passionate fans. And so passionate fans, of course, breed, as I like to call them, keyboard cowboys, who are good at writing comments on articles and have opinions. And in the racing business, we call it bench racing, right? Like you're sitting around and you're just bullshitting about what you think should happen because you're a genius. And
13 for the count from last game. We got 13 good words. This is how stuff gets done here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Good.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. So, but and in fairness, one of the highlight of my time at Fiat Chrysler, which is a story for a cocktail later if you're up for it, is we win this championship, which is a big deal, right? Big deal. And then we shut down the program, which was because of a corporate decision. So, and luckily we did announce that we were going to be shutting it down, so it wasn't like this huge like door slam. Everyone knew and the fans know. But the thing that's crazy, of course, is fans are passionate, and racing fans are as passionate as you are about, being a fan of the Bills or the Red Sox or the Yankees. You have either a favorite driver, or you're always a Chevy fan, you're always a Ford fan, you always like, Dale Jr., whatever it is. You wear the T-shirt, you have the swag at home, you support the sponsors. And so when this stuff is happening, there's emotion. And, who do they take the emotion out on? Which was weird, because prior to that, I was just an automotive executive, and you didn't know my name.
And the interesting thing here, and I think the nice thing with the racing business, once you put the lid down, it's about the right foot.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what it makes. And I do get the question oftentimes because of the nature of being right here is about Danica for all the credit and success that she had.
Yeah.
I said, how do you get there? You invent a time machine.
Yeah.
You got to go live overseas at 15,
Yeah.
which she did by herself and a host parent to go out and do something. It
Yeah.
wasn't just showing up on the scene and having the fastest car. You got to go earn it every day.
Any pro racing driver that you see has started, usually, if they're starting at 7 years old, it's late.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're starting as absolute kids coming up karting and yeah.
All right, so here's the thing I've always enjoyed about the racing business. It's the ultimate risk. You got $1 million race car before all the parts and pieces. You got to go out and recruit the staff. You got to have one hell of an engineering team. And in this particular case, since we're talking about IndyCar, and I know we'll address F1 because you also oversee that, and she sits on the FIA board of commission. But you got 4 laps. Beth went out the door, put a team together in stealth mode, showed up at the Indianapolis 500 when there's a thing called bump day, which means all these cars have to show up, and there's only 33 historically. It's the greatest spectacle in racing, the largest single racing event in the world.
Sporting event, yeah.
All over the world,
Yeah.
200 plus countries.
Yeah.
But it's 4 laps. And if you make it, you're in. But all that money, all that effort, a year and more than that of time and energy, and then most importantly, the reputational risk, which is never put on the P&L, but is everything in Indianapolis, is on the line. Now, you want to talk about sweating it out? Cameras are everywhere, and you like that bird, as they say. What's that like? 4 laps. I know what you ended up like, but they're not there.
Right. So yeah, what's unique about the Indy 500? So Indy 500 started in 1911. So last year it was 110 years old. To back up, as I said, I grew up a racing fan. I'm at the car companies. The reason I started my team. So what's unique about my team? Why is it different? Why does this make? Why am I here today? My team is mostly women. It never happened before. There's a reason I did it. I was at a car company. I'm in meetings and I'm seeing obviously mostly men. I'm at the racetrack in different disciplines of racing, mostly men. Car companies were lamenting, I mentioned how they're using racing, how they're leveraging racing. Car companies, and therefore the suppliers in the industry, were lamenting this shortage of talent. There's this shortage of engineering talent. People are retiring at a faster rate than they're being hired in. And it was literally like an industrial crisis, or we're facing this crisis. We're watching it going off the cliff. And after watching a lot of hand-wringing and hearing a lot of belly aching, I was like, well, what are you going to do about it? And I thought, okay, what we need to do is start talking to people when they're younger. Because if you're a car company, you're recruiting from colleges. You're going to college fairs. If you're colleges, you're recruiting from high school. The way that we have to do this is go higher funnel, right? We have to start talking to people when they're younger. Did some research, figured out that you can affect a kid's trajectory of what they want to be when they grow up between 10 and 12. I'm like, bingo. How can I attract the 10 to 12-year-old? Maybe young women, get them involved and interested. Racing, selfishly, because I love racing. And racing as a business model was a bit broken too. And I thought, we need to keep deliberately talking to kids. How are we going to widen the audience? How are we going to get more people watching on TV or watching in the stands? What's a group that's underserved? I like racing. I want everybody to like it as much as I do. Women. I was just solving a business problem. I'm a business person. I'm working in automotive business, and kind of touching racing. I'm not a sports business person. Now I am, but it's not what I studied. So that was the kind of origin story. So back in 2015, I resigned from Fiat Chrysler because we're winning all these things, we're overachieving, everything they've asked us to do, we're like knocking it out of the park, but yet one by one, each of these programs is starting to get shut down because of internal politics. That's the cocktail I referenced for later. I mean, it's like the infighting that was happening. I was so naive to it because, respectfully, I'd come from Aston Martin, this small little, tiny company. I go to Fiat Chrysler, and the infighting between the different divisions was so funny to me because I'm thinking, isn't our competitor like General Motors and Ford? If we have the same dental insurance, I think we're on the same side. But they didn't see. It was so crazy. But I get it. It's just sort of this culture. I think the statute of limitations is over. I think I can say that out loud now. So I resigned in 2015, and I decided I'm going to start a race team because that's what you do. And it's funny because to hear you say it about what was it like on bump day, thank God in those moments, yes, I knew what I was doing, and yes, I had this big aspiration, but like anything, the biggest professional moment of your life, you're just focusing on the task at hand, because if I had thought of the things that you just said, I would have been a nervous wreck. I will say the only saving grace is because this was last year, we were still required to wear masks. So the whole time I was on TV and there were cameras in my face, I had a mask on, which was awesome because you could not see the things that I was saying. Because there would just been a black bar anyway over my face, believe me. So what is unique about the Indy 500? So yeah, I want to start this race team. The reason I chose IndyCar is because it's fantastic racing. It's super competitive. And what's lovely about racing is men and women can compete side by side. We don't have a separate league. We don't need to have a separate league because the car doesn't know, right? And the thing that I was also really keen, why I wanted to have this team and tell these stories about the entire team is racing has been really bad about just telling you about the driver. A race team, my team last year, for instance, this year, next year, my team is 30 people. One of them is a driver. 29 aren't. And those 29 roles are, and respectfully, don't say this to racing drivers, not everybody wants to be a racing driver. They're fragile little beings. But there's so many other roles, being an engineer, being a mechanic, being a strategist, the business side, right? I mean, being the head of marketing for a racing team, being the head of media and PR. So all of those things are valuable and integral, and those are all places where women can work as well. So that was the idea. In 2016, I was going to run in the Indy 5. I had this idea to do it. What's unique about the 500 so the IndyCar season is it's 17 races. A typical race through the rest of the season, the field is about 23, 24 cars. The Indy 500 is always 33 cars. That's the tradition, 110 years, it's 33 cars. The way that you get from the regular field up to 33 is you get these drivers that will come in from Formula One or NASCAR, or they've just retired and they want one more shot at it. And the way that you do that, and this is how I wanted to start, because it's unique to the sport, is you basically can rent a car. So you've got a driver and a pile of money, and you can rent a car. So if you're the Andretti team and they're running 4 cars full time, they'll usually for the 500 run a 5th and a 6th. So they've got some cars on the shelf, they've got some people kind of on a roster, kind of sitting on the bench, and they call them, they're experienced, but they're maybe working on the junior teams or whatever because they're later in their career and they don't want to be on the road as much. But for the month of May, as we call it, or now the 2.5 weeks of May, they're happy to kind of step up and run this car. So you can basically rent a car from a team and you get all of this media and you get all of this splash. So I thought, okay, this would be a good way for me to start, which sounds ridiculous because it's literally the biggest race in the world, but the mechanism allows for that. I also know everybody in the business, so I knew that I wasn't coming in like a stranger. The public didn't know my name, but everyone in racing did. So I tried this in 2016. There was some issues logistically, and wound up at the 11th hour, had to pull the plug, had to wear that in the media too. That was nice, took that one on the chin.
Over-reported.
Absolutely, and in fairness, yeah, like it was absolutely the right decision. The car was not, as competitive as it was going to need to be. And so the thing in racing, number one is safety, number two is competitive, and as I say, number three is your ego. And if you get that order wrong, it'll bite you. So pulled the plug in 2016, had to wear that, took a couple of years off to regroup. My intention in 1920, I was like, all right, I'm going to make another run at this. Maybe I'll start in the junior series. We have a ladder, Indy Lights, I'll do this, do that. In the meantime, Roger Penske buys the IndyCar Series and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Great, I text him, congratulations. He said, great, what are you up to? Whatever. So then about 6 months later, he announces, I'll tell you the real reason why, but he announces this diversity initiative, Race for Equality and Change. Admittedly, in 2016, when I was attempting, he was actually helping me behind the scenes because loyalty, relationship, helped him win a 2012 NASCAR Cup Championship. They announced this diversity initiative in IndyCar, and I called him up and I said, what's this about? And he's like, not really sure. Do you want to come to the office and talk? And I said, yeah. So bless them, they had good intention, but they really hadn't fleshed it out. So he said, what's going on with your team? And I said, here's the thing. I'd love to do Indy Lights, maybe a sports car program, and grow into IndyCar. And he said, what if you did IndyCar now? And I was like, I'm not sure if I could do that, in such a short amount of time. He said, let's work together. So as much as it seems like a ridiculous thing to I'm going to start a team and I'm going to start here, I was a little bit goaded into it. And when you have somebody like that, I want to start a baseball team, and the Steinbrenner family is like, hey, come with us. You're like, okay. So that's really what it was.
Interesting choice, given that they also own a team.
Funny enough, Steinbrenner also is an investor in Andretti Autosport, yeah. Yes. So with that said, we announced the team in January of 2021. We're going to run in May of 2021, 5 months. The way that so respectfully, there aren't enough women to put together a team, not women at the pro level. There's some here and there, I can't steal them, so I have to build them. So I through Penske Racing, we found one woman who knows another woman who went through some NASCAR pit training, and she knows a woman, and then this woman played college lacrosse, has never been to a racetrack before, seems fit, okay. When I tell it back, it seems way worse.
It's the best Netflix story that's not yet made, because there's a lot of really funny stories about it. Can you lift a tire? Okay, I'm in.
Right, you'll do. You fit in these pants. So.
Not the driver.
True story. It was hard for us to find the over-the-wall pit shoes because the team that they just are always men, and they're like, "Hi, do you make them in a women's size 5?" No, we don't. Could you? Sure. So literally we had to deal with that kind of stuff that you wouldn't even think of. So basically, the way that I was going to do this magical thing was, let me take these rookies and let me take these veterans and put them together. So it's like master and apprentice.
Yep.
And we had them going. We had them literally creating this pit stop school, which we did at Penske Racing. And just to put it in perspective, a pit stop for IndyCar is 6 seconds. And the reason it's long, for all of you F1 Drive to Survive, you're like, oh my God, that's so slow. We refuel the car. So you're refueling a car in 6 seconds, changing all 4 tires, taking a tear off, and then, because we have a windscreen, so taking a tear off, and then they drive away. We hire these women, they start practicing, just also so that you know, because if you watch this back, it's on Peacock, you could watch it on demand. When it comes to the Indy 500, the other thing that's unique about it is you have to qualify. So I said there's 33 cars, but some years you have more than 33 who are attempting to qualify. You could have 40 cars show up, you could have 34 cars show up. Our year last year was 35. This year in 2022, I chose not to be in the Indy 500. There's a reason for that. But there were only 33 cars, just like back in 2016 where I pulled the plug. There were only 33 cars, so everybody makes it. Everybody gets a ribbon. Doesn't mean you're going to win, but it means that you're guaranteed to be in the show. So something's very desirable about that because it costs a lot of money. But the actual way that you qualify to be in the Indy 500, the format is it's the weekend before the race. It's also televised. There are people in the stands. It's a 2-day thing, a Saturday and a Sunday. So basically, the format is you get in line, you literally have a draw, like a little lottery the night before, of what order you're going to go, and it's a single file line, and the car goes out, and it does 4 laps. And we get your average speed for those 4 laps. To put it in perspective, the average speed is about 230 miles an hour. Average. That's a lot. Indianapolis Motor Speedway is 2.5 miles around. So 4 laps is 10 miles. So you basically go out and your driver goes for 10 miles as fast as she can go. And you're waiting for the time, the average time, and seeing where the leaderboard is. And that's why, especially on day 2, they call it bump day, because you're getting bumped out, right? Because if you want to be, the first day you want to be in that top 30. That's what, it sets the field for those 30, and it's 3 cars across, so the first 10 rows are set in day 1. Anyone who doesn't get into that 30 in day 1 is relegated to day 2. We get relegated to day 2. It was a surprise to all of us because, again, we're aligned with Team Penske. To put it in perspective, Team Penske has won the Indy 500 18 times. The next closest team is 5. Not even, it's ridiculous. So in fairness, I will say that I thought we won when we did the deal with Roger, because it's we're with these guys. Look at us, right? And if you looked at the way we were in practice and our speeds, you would have thought we'd be mid-pack. Everybody would have. So here we are, the end of Saturday, and we're 33, which means we're relegated to Sunday bump day. And it's to the point where Roger apologized, which is shocking. And not that he's not, but he's more we don't know what's going on. We didn't know what was going on until the following Tuesday. Anyway, we're relegated to day 2, and the format is there's 5 of us, right? Because it was 35 cars going for 33. So now 5 cars, similar format. You get a shot to go, 4 laps. Who's the fastest? So now it's only the top 3. The bottom 2 get sent home. It's televised. TV cameras, wall of cameras. In fact, during it, I still have this very funny moment because somebody took a picture from behind of the wall of cameras that are just watching my reaction, right? So it's just eyes because I've got that trusty mask on. And I have my phone on the timing stand. I got the headset on. My phone lights up. It's my cousin. And I tell this story, and I always have to give the little caveat that he's actually a very intelligent person. But he texts me, and he's like, dude, you're on TV right now. I know I'm on TV. It's 1,000 cameras. So what was hair-raising is we're sitting at 33rd. We were the slowest of the 33, and then the 34th and their 35th keep going. And they go for another attempt and another attempt. And so you're just sitting there, and the clock is ticking down, and I'm willing the clock to tick down. And I'm willing the other 2 cars to just be a little slower. And it's just that thing where you're sitting there and there's nothing you can do. And it's one of the biggest sports moments. And we knew when the last car tried their last attempt that we probably were going to hold, and I think we probably had about 7 minutes to let the clock count down. It was of course the longest 7 minutes of your life. But when the clock hit 0 and we made it and we qualified for the Indy 500, the crowd erupts, the stands erupt, but even though I knew, I don't think I really appreciated the historical significance. It was the first time in 110 years that a majority women's team made the field. No one had ever attempted before. But I will say that in those moments, if we failed, I was feeling like I'm carrying the burden of a gender, I've set us back. The other thing about it, when you say all the glory or the agony of defeat, my team is named after my family. It's my name on it. Before, I was just an automotive executive behind the scenes, whatever. It's, you're a steward of a brand, which carries with it responsibility. But now all of a sudden, people are walking around with T-shirts with my name on it. And my parents have both since passed, which they would get the biggest kick out of this, as you can imagine. But there's those moments of I'm bringing shame to my family. But luckily, we made it. And the reason, can I just say, the reason why we were 33rd and why we weren't in the middle of the pack, we were dragging brakes. So we figured out there was a mechanical problem with the car 2 days later. But what's amazing about that is, so our driver, Simona De Silvestro, she's switched, she's fantastic. The car was not as stable as it could have been. The setup was a little off. But she basically drove a car with no grip. So imagine driving on ice for 10 miles, not a lot of control, and the brakes were slightly dragging the whole time, and she made it.
Yeah, I'm going to use that's not easy on a best day with the best equipment. and why Beth won't say it, even the captain has missed this race one year with all of the money, all the engineering, and all the talent in the world, completely, all the cars.
And when he missed it, he left and started his own league.
Well, it's nice to be the captain, but I will tell you,
And then he came back.
all of my daughters wanted to know when that team went out. Now, they've been to almost every major racing event in the world, and they've seen a lot of great racers, but they wanted to see it because of what it meant. And so they're watching the longest 7 minutes, because I'm like, okay, let's see where this goes, let's see where this goes. And then you make history. And that's how history gets made, right? You didn't set out to make history. You set out to be the fastest car in the race, not the fastest female car in the race, the fastest car in the race. For those of us who were around, Beth, and particularly watching Fiat in front of a Dodge, or excuse me, in front of a GM for us for a while, we're like, okay, we just lost the national championship for NASCAR to Dodge. To Dodge, you know?
Who had a two-car,
With the two-car team. We got 12 General Motors running around and what, you know. I'm going to ask some other questions. Obviously, a lot of people talk about F1 and IndyCar, and I want to make sure you get this out there because you find sponsors differently, and we're running short on time. And I want to make sure that when you have a stage like this, just give us some quick differences because IndyCar is very different, purely American in the sense of it's delivering the best open-wheel racing in the world. It's also from front to back, the closest racing. But how do you go out and find partners?
I'm glad you say partners because you said that earlier. That's exactly what I do. I do not call them sponsors. It feels weird. The thing about racing that is fantastic versus, so what's unique about racing versus, you've all learned this, is that we don't have a home stadium, right? Our whole series goes, we're all together, we go from event to event. What's great about that is we have concentrated eyeballs, all of our fan base is watching. Because race fans know that we run on sponsorship and partnership, they support the sponsors very well. Like they know that because it feels like they're supporting their team if they're supporting the sponsors of that team, so that's nice. Our sport is very much B2B. So what's great is you build a partnership in the beginning, and we say this, like we can sit down now with a clean sheet of paper with a partner across the table and write all the things that we think this partnership will have across 3 years. But then 6 months from now, I'm gonna sign another partner where there's this wonderful B2B opportunity that we couldn't even imagine today. So that's really what we sell on. It is that same thing. I mean, especially because we're a women-forward team, it's allowing me to talk to women-owned businesses, women consumer products, and all of those things that are authentic. In fairness, we were approached by like a vaping company, and because my target audience is kids, no, I'm not going to do that. And yes, at the end of the day, we have to find partners because that's what funds it and what pays for that dental insurance now for my team. But if it's authentic, it's going to be longer lasting.
Okay, that's one of the best. Listen, you only get to tell history many years from now. You weren't there when Billie Jean King said, no, I want to be paid the same, I want to be treated the same, and walked out with 8 professional women. You're here at the stage meeting someone that made history because she risked it all, and that's what I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.